Hello. All right. So, welcome. I'm Caitlin, Katie Room, and this is The Signal. And we're just going to see how this goes. So, I made slides for myself, and I'll share them with you so that I can stay on track. So, the primary purpose of this stream is to promote indies. So, frequently I will reference the indies that I enjoy. Today, we're going to start with a few news items about some indies that we've reviewed stuff before from them. You can find the articles on my website already. We'll just acknowledge that they happened here. And then talk about an upcoming review. I'll hit my top 3 things that I enjoyed about that book, and I will share with you a quote. I'll try not to give away too much. My reviews tend to be a little spoilery, so we'll try and not do that here. And then after that, I want to talk about the article, Fantasy Role-Playing is Hurting America, that came out on Christianity Today. Keeps appearing in my tweet deck. And so I thought I would talk about it and my thoughts on the conversation that's happening as a result. And then after that, we'll just talk briefly about a poll that I did on Twitter and the results. And then we'll sign off after that. Okay, so I have titled this one "No Fantasy for Christians?" ? That is related to the article. And I would love to hear you guys' opinions about that, whether or not you are Christian yourself. Okay, so a couple news items. The first one is that Light Unto Another World, volumes 6 through 10, is now available to be backed on Kickstarter. When I looked at this the other day, it was 40% backed. I understand now it's fully backed, and they're looking at the stretch goals now. So that's pretty exciting. And the link that I've left here is, which obviously you can't click on because it's on the video, but I'll make sure to put it in the description as well, is to our review of the very first book in that series. I really enjoyed it. It's actually pretty timely because the review that is upcoming is also an isekai. So I'm pretty excited about that, and it's kind of relevant. The second one is that the St. Tommy NYPD series number 10 is doing really, really well in its initial release. It got to the number 1 new release in Christian fantasy and in religious fantasy and sci-fi, I believe. Those are the only ones I know of for sure. The series used to be published by Silver Empire before they shut down, and now I believe Tuscany Bay Books picked it up, and really glad that they did. This is another really good one. Again, link to the very first one in the series that we did a review for. And eventually, I hope to be able to read all the way through all the series for everything. But right now, I just haven't had time to pick up a sequel. I feel really bad about that. and I just turned on my comments so that I can see them. And I would say hi back to Draco Nightmare. Okay, next thing is my upcoming review for Gun Magus by LaPoint. So, after reading a book, I always come up with my own one sentence opening for my review. This one, I really liked how simple and like unpretentious LaPoint was about just making a nice isekai. It follows a lot of the tropes, but it doesn't apologize for them. It doesn't make it a big deal. And I really liked that. So that's why I put the word unpretentious. Straightforward, simple. Just if you like isekai, you're going to like this one. So gunslinging male lead, eldritch floating fortress, and anime girls. So really, I don't want to give away too much. It's good, and those three elements, I think, are part of that. I want to hit my top 3 for this again without giving away too much, but you'll be able to read my full review. I believe August 1st is when I'm planning to post it. So my very, very favorite part was the ghost train. I really enjoyed that setting, that's the whole scene that happened around that. And I thought that it was funny how he stuck in one of his other books is there in that scene, and I think that's fun. My second thing that I really enjoyed was the lead's origin. I didn't feel like this main character was wasting his life. Sometimes with isekai, you feel like the person that the hero was before in their hometown in the real world is kind of not worthy of admiration or praise in any way. They're not fulfilling a heroic role there in any way, shape, or form, including when they're, sitting in front of their computer playing games, without knocking on that kind of thing, because that's something that I also enjoy. It's not a very proactive personality, if that makes sense. Ken is different. He has a very proactive, heroic thing that he is doing when he gets isekai'd. And it's not just like pushing someone out of the way of the truck that hits him, but he's actually in a confrontation with antagonists. And I think that's unique and lays out that this is going to be a character who isn't going to be passive or need an extrinsic motivation in order to do the right thing. And then the third thing is that I wanted to talk about real quick was how over the top everything was. It's just crammed full of fun ideas. My go-to example would be there is a flying pirate ship / tank battle. Like, it's just every there's just more and more crammed together. And that goes from elements like the pirate ship to action. Everything is constantly fulfilling a desire to have more interesting things happen. So this will be the third and final installment in our Indie Spotlight program that we did this summer. And so please keep an eye out for my review. And remember to comment whether or not you've read it. And you will be entered into a drawing for a physical copy of it. Okay, so this article has been creating some interest online, and it keeps showing up in my tweet deck. So I thought I would talk about it. Initially, I sort of dismissed it as not interesting to me, mainly because it talked about D&D. And when I clicked on the article, it wasn't about D&D at all. It was about politics. And I was like, okay, this isn't something that I necessarily want to spend my time reading about. But it kept coming back and kept coming back up in my feed. So I thought I would talk about it, especially as most of the discussion has nothing to do with the article or the point of the article, which I thought was really interesting. So starts out with this quote that I've put on here. As a kid in the 1980s, I heard dire warnings from my evangelical elders about the fantasy role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons. It was, we were told, a foothold of the occult. Now in the 2020s, and I can't see, whoops. Drat. Sorry. Now in the 2020s, I am wondering if my evangelical elders weren't partly right about the way fantasy role-playing can paganize a culture, just not in the way they expected. So the article itself is not actually about Dungeons and Dragons or role-playing in the traditional sense, but he argues that as a culture, we are role-playing and fantasizing as political activists. And that is contributing to the downfall of the nation's institutions. So the article itself is really, really fascinating. Posits an interesting idea, has some good points, particularly about the sort of pagan ideas of heroism, but combined with the ideas of atheism where nothing has value, and then all of it sort of labeled as Christian. And he has that concern that I understand. But he doesn't make a good argument that the bringing the political activism of the comment section into the real world is actually role-playing. And I didn't find it compelling that the connection between that and the downfall of our nation's institutions. And then the third thing that I found suspect is the fact that in and of itself, the downfall of our institutions is a bad thing. Uh, maybe I'm a little bit I don't know if that would be revolutionary. I have trouble understanding why we wouldn't want reform at the very least for many of the institutions is such a broad term that makes me like, what is even meant by that? And there's just not enough detail in this article, I feel like. I'm a little bit like, good. If the media is included in that, that's the obvious one that I think is undermined, has been undermined by the increase in political interest and passion, and the popularizing of discussing political topics, if that makes sense. But all of that is kind of irrelevant because that's not how anyone talked about this article. As per usual, no one read it and just assumed that it was Satanic Panic. So there was a lot of discussion related to whether or not Christians should be playing D&D or fantasy role-playing games, but further, should they also be consuming fantasy media? And I think the obvious answer to that question is yes, there's absolutely a place for Christians to be not just consuming, but also producing fantasy and sci-fi, obviously, as part of that. There is a sense in which we are even responsible for doing that because of how we can bring topics before readers in a way that is entertaining, but also thought-provoking. We can explore complex ideas that are more difficult to broach in realistic settings, in realistic situations, because of their nature. Particularly the suspension of disbelief. There's a lot of acceptance when you're reading fantasy, sci-fi, when you're playing a game with those elements, when you're watching television or a movie. The suspension of disbelief, there's more of that involved than a historical drama or a crime show. So there's already an acceptance of a theoretical world and a theoretical worldview that allows discussions of deeper spiritual stuff to occur. So I would argue that it's important that Christians be involved in fantasy and sci-fi and producing those. And I don't think it's wrong for us to enjoy those as our entertainment either. Would love to hear what you guys think about this, obviously. The sort of argument that we shouldn't be playing with magic, I guess, it's not very well thought out, not well researched. There's a lot of stuff that's been written about this. Obviously, Lewis and Tolkien are my go-to guys. And they both were not concerned. They were with whether or not their stories were leading people into the occult. They didn't believe that was a problem that they needed to be concerned with. On the other hand, I guess we want to be aware of the opposition's opinions about this. There was a lot of very negative posts related to this article where atheists and just unbelievers in general were lumping in Christianity with all of the fantasy as being one thing. A lot of derisive comments saying things like, well, Christianity is in and of itself a fantasy role play. So there is an element of the fantastic that blurs the lines between reality and our own creation, our own worlds that we have written down, put to page. So I think that is an important thing to be aware of, but I don't think it changes the discussion over much. Again, I would love to hear what you guys think about this in the comments. I felt like this article was trying to put in perspective a political event, and it just wasn't taken that way. David Room, that's my husband. I have a standing tweet deck search for Christian sci-fi, and 90% of the tweets were something like, "Why do Christians hate science fiction when their religion is science fiction?" LOL. And that is exactly what I'm talking about. It was very much sort of a negative view of, and that gets at the idea that Christians hate sci-fi. That's just not true. The other thing that I disliked about this article that I just want to talk about real quick is how it put a negative spin on the desire to be heroic. It made it seem like people who are upset, who are passionate about their values, about their ideologies, who then leave comments online, who go out and take part in protests, are on the same level as people who play video games, who play role-playing games in the basement, with that sort of tone that these kinds of articles have been written before, that negative tone of superiority. They aren't doing anything productive. They aren't fulfilling a role in society. And on the first two, I'm just going to say that's not what I want to talk about, whether or not that's true. But I feel like political activism is an entirely different beast. And the idea that if you have a desire to be more than quote unquote Dave from accounting, and the way that you are going about that is doing something in the real world to promote your ideas, that just doesn't seem the same to me. It, in particular, because we're talking about ordinary people doing things. He actually references C.S. Lewis at one point. He says, so he's trying to make a larger point about what we believe as Christians. So talks about C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis thought that paganism was a better place to start with proclaiming meaning than arid secularism is. He pointed out that the myths of paganism at least acknowledge a reality beyond the material. But what happens when we discover a kind of syncretism that mixes a pagan sense of meaning with a secular loss of hope, all the while thinking itself to be Christian? That's that quote that I referenced earlier. Yet the way of Jesus is quite different. Then he talks about, going forward a little bit, the kingdom of God doesn't find meaning there. It brings meaning by joining with an altogether different narrative, the story of Jesus. His life is our life, his glory is our glory. And Jesus defines what wisdom and power really are by embracing an object found most baffling by the Romans and other pagans of his day, the cross. So he's just linking it with the larger narrative. When we start to really understand and embody that in our churches, maybe fewer Daves will find their identities in either accounts payable or Ajax. That's his Dave's handle on his games online. Maybe more of them will see that there's glory in the ordinary and giving your life away for the people you love. So he references glory in the ordinary, but he doesn't see that he doesn't see the importance of of ordinary people doing things politically. So that irked me. I gotta catch up on the comments. You guys are talking. David has another good comment, pointing out that, and this is kind of a view that I've seen and heard about a lot more recently, about that there is a belief, and I think particularly on the left, that the government is supposed to do stuff and people are supposed to let the government do stuff and not be themselves doing things, with the notable exception of government approved protests. Like to share this one as well. I think that there's a dual, there's two halves to this. Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. You should mind your own business and work with your hands, just as we told you. But we also beat our swords into plowshares in the future. There's definitely a value in modest living, but there's also a time and a place for swords, to be swords. And the discerning the time is the challenge. And I think that perhaps the reason that I was so frustrated with the article was that it seemed to assume that it wasn't the time for people to be having almost ambitions beyond our station, to want to be part of a movement to bring our nation back onto a track that we desire and want to have our children inherit, So that's probably why I was so irritated. It's like, you little people are having thoughts above your station. You shouldn't, even if your nation seems like it's going in a direction that frustrates you, should just grin and bear it and let the big people figure it out for you. I'm just reading guys' comments, and I'm really, really appreciating everybody's participation. It's making me feel like I'm doing something with while here, not just talking to myself. I like this one as well from Donald. Oh gosh. Okay, Jacob, I have been meaning to talk to you about this and make sure I pronounce your last name right. I want to say it Wheatvolkt. Fantasy done correctly doesn't take us out of reality, but to look for the deeper reality of the real. And that is part of the reason why I think that the political activism isn't quite the same as role playing. Yes. Okay. I was just reading this comment from P. Duggan. Responding to my thoughts. And I see where you're coming from for sure. That this article is sort of in response to an idea that Moore is recalling from a conversation with Bannon, who I have mixed ideas about from various things that I have heard. So there is an element of people on both sides trying to manipulate and weaponize the frustration that people are feeling by making us feel empowered. So there's also an element of discernment that needs to happen on our part for sure. So the entire reason that I wanted to bring up that article was really more to do with the conversation about fantasy that was happening sort of orthogonal to it. So I hope that this was an interesting discussion and would love to see you guys continue a conversation in the comments when this goes no longer live. And also, like, if you guys want to talk to me about it on Twitter or wherever, I would love to. I think this is really interesting. Okay, so I thought I would close out with talking about a poll that I ran during the week. Just really briefly. I just asked, where do you find what to read next? I kind of tweeted it because someone complained about Goodreads, and I have never found Goodreads to be super helpful to me as a reader. Kind of frustrating, like the lists are always the same. If you're trying to find something new by searching lists, you're just not going to find it. If you know somebody and you look at their lists, then you're more likely to find stuff that is unique and good, and not generic or tradpub. And then there's like there seem to be people who go on Goodreads and then just leave negative reviews for stuff that they have not they've not read, they don't know the author, they have like no context for. So it's like there's out of control, like real trolling going on, which just makes it frustrating to me. So I thought I would make a poll and see what other people were using. And Goodreads definitely was one of the lesser ones that people used. Social media was the most, um, which was it's kind of surprised me that it didn't have a larger lead, I guess. Amazon, of course. Others was largely physical stuff. I was kind of surprised. There were quite a few people who said browsing at bookstores or the library. So I was really interested to hear about that. I definitely did a lot of library when I was in high school and college. When I didn't have money, um, but I haven't really relied on either. Um, I haven't really relied on the library for finding new stuff, just because it's always behind, even with trad pub stuff and with indie stuff. There's no way you're gonna get anything remotely interesting. And with bookstores, the only thing that I have bought physically because I saw it in a bookstore was manga, and I feel like that's a little bit different. um, so I was really interested to hear that there were still people who uh, felt that those physical mediums were still important. Um, if you follow me, you know I have a very uh, suspect uh, viewpoint towards libraries at this point. I feel like they are they're not necessarily run by people who like us any, if they ever were. So, and then I feel like bookstores are full of the trad pub, the same old stuff that we complain about. um, I was also interested to see um, that most people have, at least who commented, have a list that they pull off of. Uh, and like I definitely have a huge, very long list. Um, but I was surprised that um, other people used their lists as guidance on what to read next. I usually um, I usually draw from it, but I was really interested um, to hear how people found new stuff. So would love to hear um, what you guys use. I um, Patrick points out that when Goodreads got bought out by Amazon is when it started to deteriorate as a useful medium. And he uses it to organize, which is, I have heard, a valid way to use it. um, all right. I would like to do more polls and like talking about them briefly in my streams. So if you see a poll up on Twitter for me, take a second and I'll talk about it afterwards. I think that would be fun. I don't know if anybody else will, but I think it's really interesting what people react to. Like this one got a lot of responses, and it was a lot of fun for me. So all right, this is my last slide. I'm going to close out. Right now on Periapsis Press is the indie spotlight for Jiao Chu's Endeavor, The Kidnapped Mouseling. This one was a really good one, so definitely check it out. I have the review, the excerpt, and the author interview up on Periapsis Press. If you comment on any of those articles, then you will be entered into a drawing for a physical copy. And so Fiona Wolf and I will be discussing it at the end of this month. I will have to double check with her because the actual end of the month is a Sunday night. So not really sure about how people's weekend schedules are. We'll see what works for people, and particularly for the two of us, to make sure that we can talk about it. I have really enjoyed doing the Indie Spotlight. I hope that everybody else has enjoyed it as well. And yeah. Thank you guys so much for being here with me. I really appreciate it. And I hope that you guys will join me again next time. I'll try and do more like this if you guys enjoyed it and can put up with my pauses and ums. Thank you so much, guys. Good night.